Hello everybody, this is Nancy, and today we're going to do a repainting of this old painting. This old painting was called January Waxwings, and I've had it for a long time. It was actually a scene that I saw back in the 1990s of all things up in Montana, and I painted it, about 10 years ago, and it's just never sold. So I wanted to take a little bit of time here today in this demo and show you how I repainted it a little bit. So what I started off doing is I thought, well, first of all, I think the background is just a little bit too warm. It wasn't reading winter to me. For some reason at that time in my life, I was into some really warm backgrounds, as you can see in this piece. And so I decided to start trying to make that background look more wintry. So I'm coming in here. This is, I think, a mix of cobalt blue and white with maybe a little bit of green and red added in just to dull it down just a little bit. And I just am going in over the entire background of this dried painting, varying the blues and the whites and making it just a little cooler all around. Now in this section, the blues look pretty intense. We'll come back in and manage those down a little bit later and bring those down to a little bit more of a gray blue. But I started off by coming in with, some pretty intense blues here. Now, that blue sometimes includes a little tiny, tiny, tiny dab of phthalo blue to give it that little bit of blue-green. The other thing I wanted to do too is those were, dried apples that were on the tree, and I don't think they looked very good. So I am repainting those to be clusters of berries because I think they just look better. So these old, dried up apples are now becoming clusters of berries as I come in with some reds. Now the reds that I'm using here are, I think it's Perylene red, a little bit of cadmium red, and then some cobalt blue and Payne's gray to dull it down for the shadowy areas. The Payne's gray is really not a black or a gray. It's really more of a dark blue. So that Payne's gray will help kind of dull out some of those redder colors and give it a little bit more of a neutral tone. Now, as you can see, I like to work across the painting sort of all at once, meaning I go back and forth from area to area. So I indicated those berries at first, and now I'm just coming in and finishing up some of that blue background. And again, to make that background super interesting, I made sure I varied it from place to place. So it's not all the same blue across the entire background. It does change. And you'll see in a minute that I also bring in some warmer colors in the background as well, so that it's not just a blue background. You can see here I'm adding a little bit of the blues right around the birds. Those are waxwings, by the way, and those are they're really beautiful winter birds that we see in the western United States, mostly when the berries are on the trees in the fall and winter time. So now I'm coming in with some lighter blues. Now this blue that you see here is not only lighter, but I've also added a little bit of yellow and red to it. So a little bit of cadmium lemon and a little bit of a tiny, tiny little bit of cadmium red so that it comes in as a warmer blue. It's not quite a green. And again, I vary that warmer. You can see that it's a kind of a warm gray there in the bottom left-hand corner. I vary that again across the entire painting so that that slightly warm color that's coming in isn't the same warm that you see everywhere. It's similar, but it's not exactly the same. And in some areas, it's a little bit redder. In some areas, it's a little bluer. In other areas, it's a little bit more yellow-green. But I don't really want to go too strong in the background as far as like red or yellow colors, because I want that to stay in the back. The general rule here is that cool colors will recede into the background to the human eye, and warm colors will pop forward. So again, if you're painting the background and you want that background to recede all the way, what you're going to do is you're going to want to use cooler colors. Now you can see there toward the bottom, I've brought in a little bit more of that red into that gray in the background. I think that just adds a nice little bit of variety back there. And I like the way this is turning out so far. So I just continue to add a little bit more of that reddish gray all around. Sometimes I get it a little bit too intense, and then I come back in and gray it down just a little bit. And I'm also mixing it on the panel here. This is I think a linen panel that I've used for this painting. So it is okay to blend on the panel or on the canvas itself, as long as you don't, make it too much into a muddy gray color. So right now I'm coming back in with some lighter, warmer reds for those berries, just for that little tiny bit of highlights in the berries. And I'm using a similar color in the tails of these birds. Now these birds do have like a reddish tail, and it's the same general color scheme that you're seeing in the berries. It's just a little bit lighter and a little bit more yellow and a tad bit, grayed down with some gray there. And at this point, I'm also doing a little bit of revisions on the birds. So the original painting, I didn't really define the dark areas of the birds very well. So they were just black. And in here now I'm coming in and giving a little bit more definition in those dark areas, making those eyes a little bit more easy for the viewer to see, and also adding a little bit more detail in that eye area, just to, again, to bring in a little bit more interest into those birds. And I'm working back and forth amongst the different birds so that I'm not just going in on one and focusing in on one all at the same time. I like to kind of work across the canvas. Maybe it's just because I have a little attention deficit disorder. I don't know. But I do like to work back and forth amongst different areas. So here I'm trying to get that eye down. I don't want to go too bright with the eye because it's kind of an overcast day and there's not a lot of strong light on the eye, but I do want the viewer to see there is an eye there. So what I'm putting in is like a warm gray to indicate just the top of the eye. Now here I'm taking a soft dry brush, and it's, I think, it's not a sable, but it's a synthetic sable type brush. It's very soft, and I'm just softening up all of those edges in the background and then bringing in a little bit warmer color there in the lower left. Now, I do come back in and fix that in the lower left. That ended up reading a little bit too bright there in the lower left. So in a few minutes, you'll see me come back and, tone that down just a little bit, because I always want the eye to go to the center of interest. I don't want anything to detract from that. Everything needs to support that center of interest, which is mostly it's the top bird in the middle, but the other two birds add to that center of interest as well. So right now, again, I'm just going in and fuzzing up that background, and now I'm coming in to the birds and lightening up those birds a little bit. In the original painting, I got those things a little bit too dark. They weren't really that dark. Now, the other thing you have to realize is that I long ago lost the photograph that I was working on, the photo references for here. So I ended up having to just look on the internet and just see, it's trying to remember what colors these birds actually were. So I used like about 10 different photographs for color reference, not for position reference, because I already had that from my own photos, but just for the color reference so that I would get the colors of these birds a little bit more accurate. They were lighter in reality than I had painted them. So that's what I'm doing here, is I'm bringing in a little bit lighter and brighter colors, and also really trying to harmonize them and make them pop against that cooler blue background. And so because orange is the opposite of blue on the color wheel, if you add orange to like this bird and then put it against a blue background, that orange bird or the little bit of orange in the bird is going to pop out and come forward. And that's what I'm doing across all of the birds right now. I'm bringing in different varieties of orange. And honestly, mostly I'm making this up. Again, I don't have my actual photo reference anymore. I'm looking at, 10 or so color photos off the internet, but the rest of it I'm sort of making it up just from my own experience. And, you gain that experience the more paintings that you do. It's sort of like the miles of canvas. You need to put in a lot of time at the easel on your canvas to make progress. And preferentially, if you can do that and get some kind of a critique as well and not just rely on your own critiques, that's helpful, because when you have a more experienced artist pointing out things to you to try, or things that are working or not working, or other ways that you can do things, that's going to help you improve a lot faster than if you try to figure it all out on your own. And that's why I love going to workshops, especially when I was really learning how to do oil painting. I loved going to in-person workshops because I could get that one-on-one critique at the end of each day from the workshop instructor. So again, I'm just working on lightening up those birds, bringing a little bit more warmth into them, making them pop against that background, because I want to make sure that you, the viewer, know that those are at the center of interest. So again, it's a mixture of like light oranges and some tiny little bits of that cinnamon red color, and a little bit more pure yellows in some areas. I'm not 100% concerned with making these look like something you'd see in a birding book. That's not what I'm going after. Again, it's more of an impression of those birds. So an impressionistic feeling of what it was like to be there watching those birds on that day. Again, I just want people to be able to say, okay, well, that's a waxwing, but it doesn't have to be feather for feather looking like something out of a bird book. I just don't paint that way. I honestly don't have the patience to paint that way. And I think this looser style that I've developed, to me anyway, for me, reflects more of how I see the world. And that's really what painting should be about, or any kind of art. It should be about the way that you experience the world, not ripping off a photo, not trying to copy a photo per se. A viewer, a buyer, a collector, they're buying your work because of your vision, your input, the way you see the world. And so that's what I'm going after here. Now what I'm doing is I'm kind of going in and adding some lights to the tops of those twigs. Eventually I'm going to add a little bit of snow on those twigs too, to bring in the feeling of winter a little bit more. But right now I'm just working on lightening up those twigs just a little bit to bring in some more interest there, because I think they got just a little bit too dark in the original painting. Now I'm bringing the snow that I'm putting on Snow and Ice. It reads white here in the video. It's actually a very light blue-gray. So it's effectively a very lightened version of that background color. So I put a little bit of that on, and then I started working in the berries again. You can see I go back and forth and back and forth. I'm trying to bring in lights in those berries around the center of interest. I only want to highlight again that center of interest around those top two birds. I don't want to bring too much interest down there in that bottom cluster of berries or way off to the right. So you'll see me modify those a little bit and kind of, dull down the highlights on those other groups of berries. I just want those to be not in the center of interest, so I don't want your eye to rest on them, so I don't go in there and put too many highlights in. I just want to all of your focus should be in the center of interest. That's where your sharpest edges should be, your most vibrant brights, your darkest darks should all go in to support that center of interest. So again, I'm coming in and working on the background. You can see I work across this painting all at kind of back and forth all at the same time. Now in reality, this repainting actually took me about 4 or 5 hours over the course of, I think, 2 different painting sessions, possibly 3, to do the repainting of it. I did let this dry, and so we're coming back in on another day right now, and I had let it dry overnight and came back in the next day and worked in some brighter blues here. Now, again, this bright blue that you see on the left, I realized later it just didn't work for the painting. So I came back in and dulled it down yet again. I worked back and forth with some more grayer blues over the top of it. So again, just having that much bright, light blue over there really detracted, for me anyway, from the center of interest. So that's why I decided ultimately it wasn't going to work. But I am bringing that lighter color around the rest of the painting as well, just to brighten it up a little bit. It was, to me, that blue was getting a little bit too dark. Some people might like it that way. For me, because it was a very, very snowy day, the background was very snowy, I wanted that background to look a little bit more bright than the way that I had it. But not bright in that lower left or the mid-left corner or mid-left side of the painting, because that to me was a little bit too much. Again, I come back in later and fix that up. So you can see now I'm coming in and adding a little bit of ice to the tops of those branches, and I'm not just plopping this light blue on there, I'm also dragging it around, so it's not just a one bright stroke. It's a very soft, dry, it's almost like a dry brush type stroke. And there's no definite edges. I want that to be very soft edges. So here you see me kind of coming in and softening the edges of the snow that I'm putting on the berries as well. And I do that all across the painting. I don't want the hard edge on the snow. Now I'm coming in and I was thinking that I needed a branch down here or something. And I do work on this a little bit through the rest of the painting. It needed something in the lower left corner to balance out that bird in the upper right. And so what I did is I came back in with a branch, and I will put a few tiny berries on there. And over the course of the rest of this painting, you'll see me modify this branch just a little bit, but I do leave it in there. It just changes up a little bit as we go along. Again, I'm adding a little bit of like indication of snow and ice there with that very light gray blue. Now you'll see me come in and indicate with that dull red again, just a few berries. I don't want there to be too many off on that left side. It's sort of like, when you were a kid balancing on a seesaw or something like that. If you put too much of something bright over there on the left, all of the attention in the painting is going to be over on the left, and it will sort of overwhelm the center of interest, which is that bird at the top in the sort of upper right. But I did need just a tiny little bit down here. So I'm indicating just a few berries. I'll put some snow on those later just to dull them down a little bit. And the edges of those berries are, again, very, very soft. I don't want anything really hard. Again, hard edges draw in the eye. So this is the next day. So this is day 3. I let that dry overnight, and you can see I decided, well, that section there on the left is just a little too bright. So I'm coming in with some gray or blue. It's actually still fairly light, but it's more of a blue, gray, a little bit of red in it. And I'm just toning that down just a little bit because I think that light blue got too light and was really detracting from the rest of the painting. And then I'm taking that same blue and starting in on the berries because the berries now are dry. And I wanted to paint, wet over dry just in case I messed it up, I could wipe it off. And that's why I waited to do the snow on those berries. So again, this isn't pure white. This is a light, it's very similar to what's in the background, just a tad bit lighter. And you'll see me again over the rest of this session go back in and modify those. Right now I'm kind of coming in with a little bit darker gray blue there. And that's going to indicate some of those shadowy areas. And some snow and ice. I don't know if anybody's ever been in Montana in the wintertime. It can be super cold. I think this day, if I remember right, was like 25 below Fahrenheit. So it was pretty cold. And I wanted people to get that sense of the chill that was in the air and how, the atmospheric moisture just crystallized out on any branch that was available. And so that's what you're seeing here. Again, just kind of working back and forth with these little piles of snow on the trees and the snow that's going to be on the berries. So I'm not really going after like this massive masterpiece here. This is just a cute little painting. And it's mostly an exercise in for you and that you can continue to work on a painting over a long period of time. It's been over 10 years since I supposedly finished this painting. And I just wondered, like, is there something I can do to make it pop more? So this is really an experiment. If it didn't work, it didn't work, and it wasn't a big deal for me. But I'm a better painter now than I was 10 years ago, so I thought I might be able to kind of pull something out of my hat here with this one. Now you can see I'm going in and just refining the birds just a little bit more. They're mostly done at this point, but I just wanted to add a few finishing touches and just darken up the darks a little bit, kind of dull out some of the cinnamon areas on their tails, refine those just a little bit. Again, there's like a billion ways that you can paint this scene. This is just my way and one of my ways. I think if I were to start this from scratch again, it would look completely different. And that's fine. We as painters or artists of any kind, our skill set evolves, our tastes evolve over time, our style evolves over time. So I could not have painted this painting 10 or 15 years ago. But now I'm liking it a lot more. I like the cold feeling that this gets. I like the berries rather than those. There was something about those rotten apples that just didn't really sit well with me. And here I was thinking I needed another branch, kind of breaking up that diagonal. And I got a little bit too carried away with, it sort of looked like a witch's broom there over on the right side. I did change that a little bit as we go on. As you can see, I'm coming in right now and covering up some of that. But I did need like one offsetting line because that diagonal was so strong. I just wanted one other diagonal to sort of offset that upper left to lower right diagonal. And right now I'm just working on that and just changing that up and softening it a little bit with some added snow. Again, I go back and forth on, I'll go really super light on the snow and warm it up with some lemon and cadmium lemon and cadmium red. But then I'll come back in and dull it down again. So one of the things that you can't see in this video is that about 20 feet behind my easel and facing my easel, I have a mirror put on the wall. And that mirror, I sometimes will stand back and look at the painting in the mirror. So what it does is not only it reverses the image, but it also gives me a different perspective on the painting, and one that from, like 20 feet back. So it just changes the way that you see the painting. And a lot of times, if you look at a painting in a mirror or turn it upside down, you can see problems with the painting that you wouldn't necessarily see just by letting it stand, normally like we are here. Now I'm also coming in with a little bit drier brush and softening that snow again and just fuzzing it up. You'll see that in detail in just a little bit. And then putting a little bit of my last highlights in the birds. Now the birds themselves aren't really super yellow, but the sunlight was so warm in color that I wanted to bring some of that yellow into the birds. And then again, that yellow, a little bit of orange in it, is going to make those birds pop against that very cool background color. And just softening things up with a dry brush here, adding a little bit of really, I think it was probably effectively a cadmium orange, so a yellow cadmium lemon with cad red in there in the tails. And again, just continuing to work on modeling of those birds with a little bit of reflected light there in the shadow side. Softening the edge just a little bit, working the shadows, making sure that the shadows read correctly, but not too dark. Because a lot of times, one thing to remember if you take photos and you work from photos, most cameras, even the best ones, will still darken the shadows too much. And I'm going to do a video on how to work from photos and how to use something like Photoshop or Pixelmator to help you when you're working from photos, because again, the most of our cameras, even the best ones, still will over contrast photos, and they'll make those dark areas go black and the white areas go completely white. And that's not how your eye sees the scene. That's how the camera sees the scene, but not the eye. So here I'm just putting in the final finishing touches, and going to be calling it good pretty quickly here. Just the last highlights. Right at this point, I'm really just futzing with it. And this is when I have to put the brush down and step away from the easel, let it sit for a few days, and just evaluate it. And so I like it a lot better than the original. I like that cooler, lighter background a lot better. As you can see, we're going to look at things in detail here. You'll see that I've got a lot of dry brush now that I have, especially in the birds and the snow, that wasn't there in the original painting. And there's a little bit more detail in the eye area of the birds, you can see, that was not there in the original painting. I do like these, fruits better as berries rather than just dried apples. But I think it helps to see kind of up close here some of the things that I did to this piece. So you can see the berries. They're not super bright, actually. There's a lot of mid and dark tone reds there. And again, that's reds that are mixed with like Payne's gray or a cobalt type of blue. And I left this lower bird pretty loose. I mean, I didn't get in and put in a lot of detail because number one, it wasn't really there. And number two, it's not the center of interest. So I don't want a viewer's eye to rest on that. And again, here in the snow areas, you'll see how I really did that as a dry brush. I did not use any medium at all in this paint, except for a tiny, tiny little bit of Gamsol at first. Depending on if the paint was a little bit too stiff, I would use a little Gamsol. You can see the variety of edges here too. I try to make most edges soft, but again, I'm going to do another video strictly on edges so you can see what I'm talking about in more detail. But there is a mix of soft edges and sharper edges, and those edges really help the viewer's eye move around the painting. So a viewer's eye tends to like get sucked into areas where there's sharp edges, and it tends to just move over areas where there are soft edges. There's a little bit more of a close-up there with the snow at the top. Again, if you paint the snow as pure white, it's not going to read right. So remember, snow is not typically pure white unless it's in absolute sunlight. And even then, you're better off painting it with a color in it. So please don't use pure white out of the tube to indicate snow unless you know what you're doing. Again, I just love these berries. I think they read a lot better than those old dried out apples did. So there it is. That's the piece. And just one last close-up shot, again showing some of those softer edges. The background color is a mix of the warm grays and the cool grays, and the birds, and just some of those softer edges there. And here's the whole piece finished. All right, thanks so much for tuning in. If you want more information, check out my website, nancyryanstudio.com. And then here's a list of the colors that I used. Mostly the whites, the Payne's gray, the cool grays, cad red, cad lemon, and cobalt blue in this piece.